Hello and welcome to the channel. As always, like the video, and if you enjoyed the story, leave a comment on if you would want more. This fan fiction was not created by me, but in the description there is a link to the fanfic so you can show your support to the creator and read along. Without any more delay, let's dive into the story.
Hey, Boruto. What is that weird tent over there? Mitsuki pointed across the busy street to a small beige tent covering. People from Iwagakure lined the street outside of it, all waiting for a chance to get in. Boruto mused, looking away from his rock candy. I dunno. Let's go check it out. You coming, Sarada? I guess, if it's popular. And if I leave you two alone, who knows what trouble you'll get into. They all got into the line and waited, eyes scanning the streets and the people that passed them by. It had been a while since the third Tsuchikige's funeral, and the village was having a festival to celebrate what would have been his birthday. Team 7 was invited personally by the fourth herself. They had gone around to a couple different stalls, getting treats and food, but this would be the first enclosed space they visited. Once the line had dwindled down, they walked underneath the beige tent flap and found themselves in what seemed like a mystic's room. Strange crystals lined the tables and shelves, giving the entire area an eerie dim glow. An elderly man sat behind a table, crystal ball that swirled with murky gray smoke in front of him. The lights reflected off of the surface of his head and made it shine in the otherwise dimly lit room. One at a time, unless you came as a group. We're a group, responded Mitsuki, his eyes practically glowing yellow. Well then, what have you come for? Rocks to cure anxiety? Rocks to give you peace? Rocks to calm your stomach? Perhaps the telling of a fortune? At the mention of a fortune, Boruto's eyes narrowed. Mama Shiki's prophecy was still bothering him. If he could get a glimpse of the future, maybe he could prevent his blue eyes taking everything from him. Or at least find out what that meant. Old man. Can you tell my fortune? Sarada blinked over at him, surprised that he would have anything to do with fortune tellers and the like. But Boruto only shrugged it off like it was a joke. What? I'm curious. Besides, we waited in that long line. Might as well do something. I'll tell your fortune, but it comes with a price. The man greedily rubbed his hands together, long sleeves dangling down and brushing at the elbows. 1,000 Rio. 1,000? What a rip-off. Sheesh. Boruto took out his wallet and placed a bill on the counter. This had better be accurate. The man moved his large hands around the crystal ball as clouds swirled into the glass. Sarada peered over Boruto's shoulder, suddenly intrigued by the witchcraft. I see. You're from Konoha, are you not? The Hokage's son. As well as the clone of Orochimaru and the daughter of Uchiha Sasuke. The three widened their eyes, growing interested in what the bald man had to say. It was common knowledge that Boruto was the Hokage's son, and Sarada was part of the Uchiha clan. But knowing about Mitsuki's origins was something kept strictly confidential, even in Konoha. This is several years in the future. Or perhaps, it is closer than we think. I see faces, carved into stone. A young man with black marks on his body, a massive claw for a hand. And you, standing, a black cape on your back, a sword in your hand. A scar runs over your right eye. You are fighting the boy, your friend's nowhere to be seen. And in your right eye. Something usual. The bald man looked up from the crystal ball and peered back at the kids. Perhaps I shouldn't continue. This seems to be more serious than I thought. The knowledge of the future can be dangerous if it is not handled with caution. But I paid 1,000 Rio for this. Come on, old man, please continue. He looked back in the ball. And then he saw something that made him smile. It seems like I shouldn't move forward with the prophecy. But I can do something else for you, young lad. Something else? The man grinned at Sarada and held up a watch. Well, actually, I'll be doing something for the beautiful young miss at your side. Sarada was too stunned to move. She suddenly blinked and looked away, hiding behind her bangs as her feet shuffled backwards. Be beautiful? I am not dash. You should see yourself in the future, miss. The bald man took Sarada's hand, much to Boruto's displeasure. And sleep. Sarada fell, slumped over onto the man's shoulder. Oi! What did you do to her? Boruto got out a kunai, and Mitsuki stood in a battle stance. But the man didn't pay them any attention. He whispered something into her ear, his eyes on Boruto. Now, when I snap my fingers, you'll wake up. Every time you hear a command with the word please attached, you'll find an irresistible urge to complete that action until it's done. And you, said the man, turning to Mitsuki, and letting go of Sarada, will be unable to move your tongue every time you think of this word. As he hit Mitsuki's forehead with the butt of his palm, he leaned next to his ear and whispered, please. Why? Boruto had gone to support Sarada's slumped body in his arms, holding her shoulders up as her head gently rested against his shoulder. What did you do that for? The man smiled at Boruto under bushy eyebrows. Just for good measure. With the snap of his fingers, Sarada lifted up her head. Huh? What happened? Boruto wasn't sure whether or not to explain. There was no guarantee that it would work anyway. If it was a genjutsu, Sarada wasn't going to fall for it for long. He gently released her arms, his eyebrows furrowed. He would release it once they were outside just to make sure. Nothing. Come on Mitsuki, Sarada, let's go. The three shinobi resumed walking through the crowded streets past several vendors and back towards the food stalls in search of something to eat. Sarada leaned over to Boruto just as they were walking past a place that sold fried lizard and whispered, did something happen? I think there's a blank in my memory. Did I pass out? Boruto had already put his hand on Sarada's shoulder and released any genjutsu, so he shook his head. He pulled some weird trick on you at the end. Probably wasn't anything. Don't worry about it. It wasn't as if the old man could have really hypnotized her. Right? That being said, he broke away to include Mitsuki in the conversation. Fried lizard, huh? Kinda gross if you ask me, replied Sarada, but then again, you can't knock anything till you try it. I think they look good, said Mitsuki, his eyes gleaming at the fried lizard bodies skewered on sticks. You should try one, Boruto. Free samples. A girl who was rather short for her age carried a tray of freshly fried lizard tails on little toothpicks as she stood next to the stall. Please miss, try a free sample. As if it was instinct, Sarada reached out her hand, took a toothpick, and bit off the food before she could even comprehend what she had done. The moment she swallowed, her eyes went wide with shock. Sarada, I didn't think you wanted one. Mitsuki blinked a few times, watching her face turn blue. How is it? Sarada furrowed her eyebrows and placed the toothpick in the trash cup that sat on the tray. The girl smiled up at her. Not bad. Under the pressure of the girl's kind eyes, she was laughing nervously. Thanks. If you'd like, please purchase the full lizard from our stall. They are only 100 ryo per lizard. Before the girl could even finish her sentence, Sarada had her wallet out and was making a request to the man behind the counter. In the back of Boruto's head, he knew that the hypnosis had worked. But he still didn't particularly want to believe it. Nor did he want to let Sarada know. Not until he was able to have fun with it first. Oi Sarada, I didn't know you were into eating lizards. Boruto, she hissed through gritted teeth. Help me. I can't control my actions. It's like I'm forced to do whatever that woman says. So, you don't want the lizard? He pretended to be confused. Sarada was already exchanging her money. No. I don't want to eat something that still has the head and feet attached. The man handed her the body of a lizard, breaded and fried on a wooden stick, and smiled. Please, enjoy. The head is the best part. Boruto couldn't help but laugh as Sarada crunched down on the head of the lizard and offered the man a large smile. The second she turned away, she ran to a trash can and spit it out. Boruto. What? That man did something to me, didn't he? I don't know what you're talking about, he said, putting his hands back up behind his head. Right, Mitsuki? Mitsuki raised an eyebrow. I don't know what you mean by something, but if you mean the opposite of nothing, then I suppose he may have done something. Hey, Sarada, if you're not going to eat the rest of that, can I have it? Sarada only sighed as she handed Mitsuki the lizard, looking towards the tent they had just come from. We're going back and getting this reversed. I am not dealing with this for the rest of the day. But as Sarada turned around, she noticed that the line for the tent was stretching the length of the festival. Eyebrow twitching in annoyance, she began dragging Boruto by the arm. You got me into this mess, so you're coming with me and waiting in that line. Relax, he said, putting his hands up in surrender as he was forcefully dragged down the street. He said it would wear off by tomorrow. It was a lie, but it had to wear off at some point, right? Let's just enjoy the festival. No. Sarada, please don't make me get in that line. Sarada immediately let go of his wrist. And Boruto smirked the biggest smirk he had smirked in a while. With Sarada's new hypnosis, the only ones that were able to enjoy the festival were Mitsuki and Boruto. Sarada was forced to take every single flyer, try every single food, and even play a few games just because the vendors used the word please and directed their wares specifically at her. Boruto even used it, asking her to throw something away for her, and making her stay long past when she wanted to stay. Mitsuki had to hold her back from knocking him into the horizon line when he wasn't paying attention. As the festival drew to a close, the team of 3 made their way back to the Tsuchikage's office to give their regards, paid respects to the third Tsuchikage, climbed aboard the train, and headed back to Kanahagakure. When they arrived home, Naruto was outside the village gates waiting for them, his red hat matching the red letters painted on the green doors. Yo! How was the festival? Sarada clenched her fists and walked right past Naruto. I don't want to talk about it. She continued on until she was through the gates, heading in the direction of her house. Raising an eyebrow, Naruto looked over at his son who was grinning like an idiot. Automatically suspecting a prank in the works, he narrowed his eyes. Did you do something to her? Nah. Wasn't me. Mitsuki? Mitsuki's pale lips spread into a grin. She'll be fine in the morning, supposedly. Naruto could only stare at Mitsuki in disbelief. Mitsuki. It wasn't him. Boruto threw his hands up to defend his friend. It was a hypnotist. What's this about someone hypnotizing my daughter? A dark cape fluttered in the wind as the one-armed shinobi descended from a tree and appeared in a crouched position at Naruto's side. Sasuke-san. Boruto's grin lit up into a smile as he noted the presence of his master. You're back. Boruto. I hope you went back to that mystic and got the hypnosis reversed before you came back to the village. Naruto and Sasuke's increasingly displeased looks were starting to make Boruto sweat. It wasn't going to last forever, was it? It couldn't. Not on someone like Sarada. I thought that stuff was supposed to wear off in a day. Both Naruto and Sasuke face-palmed, shaking their heads in disapproval. Idiot. That stuff doesn't just wear off. What was done to her? Well, said Mitsuki, every time someone says the word MMM. The word MMM? Please, Boruto finished, forgetting that Mitsuki was incapable of speaking it. The word please. Ha! Sasuke laughed. I never thought I would hear that word coming from your mouth. And? What does she have to do whenever she hears it? She has to do whatever the command was that went with it. And this applies to just you? Or to anyone? Naruto asked, turning over his shoulder to see if he could still spot Sarada but seeing no one. Anyone, replied Boruto, suddenly feeling a pang of guilt for not going back with her to the tent, and simultaneously excited that he could make bossy Sarada do whatever he wanted. So, It's not going to wear off in a day? Not a suggestion like that. Usually the Uchiha clan is relatively strong against hypnotism, but if the person hypnotizing her managed to put her to sleep and reach inside her subconscious, it could last as long as the rest of her life. Boruto. Was she flustered before she got hypnotized? Kinda. The guy called her pretty and she went all tense. And why did she get put under this hypnosis specifically? Boruto shrugged. The guy looked into my future and said he would be doing me a favor. At this, both fathers cast a concerned look at each other, and then gritted their teeth. Darn that stupid psychic. The next day, Boruto traveled all the way back to Iwagakure with Sarada and asked for the psychic. On the way through the streets, he teased her a few times, making the excuse that he had to have fun with it before they fixed her. It was mostly little things, like please call me Boruto-senpai, and please go up to that random stranger and ask him for his autograph, and please yell I love Kaminari burger at the top of your lungs. And most of them of course were followed by, please don't hurt me. But as they asked around, the strange bald old guy was nowhere to be found. Kuratsuchi said he traveled here and there, showing up to festivals whenever he got the chance. But where he was going next was completely unknown. At this, Boruto immediately felt like he was going to incur Sarada's wrath and decided not to make any more requests on the way home. When they got back to the village, Sarada begged Naruto to put on a festival just to attract the psychic. He reluctantly agreed, despite there being no guarantee he would actually show up. But there was still a week of preparation and work before the festival could spontaneously be held. In the meantime, Sarada locked herself in her room and refused to come out, telling her mother that if Boruto came to the door not to let him in. But that didn't stop him from going to her window. Sarada? She ignored him, sitting on her bed with her back to the wall. If she ignored him, maybe he would think she wasn't there. He sighed. Come to the window, please. Sarada, dressed in her usual house loungewear which consisted of nothing but a sports bra and compression shorts, freaked out when her legs started moving selfishly towards the window. Wait. What? Sarada forced her arms to her sides, resisting the urge to walk any further with all of her being. I'll talk to you, so don't make me move the curtain. There was a chuckle from the other side of the window. By telling me I can't, you're making me want to do it more. Boruto. Fine, he laughed, taking a seat on her deck. Please don't open the curtain, just listen. Me, Mitsuki, and Team Inoshikacho are going to Kaminari Burger to meet with Sumire tomorrow. She's supposed to be in town. You should come. Sarada rolled her eyes behind her curtain, arms folding over her chest. You're not going to make me? No. I just wanted to invite you. I'll try to cover for you if anyone says it. I have a hard time believing that. Mitsuki would do it if he could, but he can't. And I feel kinda bad. Even though it technically isn't my fault. You're just going to use it against me, aren't you? I may or may not have fun with it after the meeting. Boruto. Out of all the names to yell, Sarada definitely yelled his the most. Alright, I won't. Will you come? She heaved a sigh. Then looked at the clock. And then the calendar. But of course, she had nothing written there. It would be strange for her to refuse, and it would likely hurt Sumire if she didn't show up. They were friends, after all. Fine. I'll come. But. You'd better cover for me. Anne. As much as I hate to ask this. Take me home afterward. I don't want Cho-Cho and the others to figure this out too. Or it will be even more of a headache. Got it. With that, his silhouette hopped up and walked to the edge of her balcony. See ya tomorrow, Sarada. She sighed and walked back to her bed. She already knew this was going to be a headache. But part of her was looking forward to seeing Sumire again. And somehow, she was oddly trustful of Boruto's word to cover for her. The only problem would be if he was able to cover for her in time. And if the others caught on. Cho-Cho would probably be too dense to figure it out, but if she did. Sarada blushed and rolled over on her side. She would just have to avoid Cho-Cho. The two stooges and the ones that kept them in check walked into Kaminari Burger, ordered, and found a seat, Cho-Cho and Mitsuki already chatting with Sumire. Upon the sight of Sarada, Cho-Cho stood up, her hands defiantly on her hips. I messaged you hours ago. Why didn't you respond? Sarada laughed nervously, a sweat drop running down the back of her face. I asked Boruto to keep me company with training my Sharingan and wasn't looking at my computer. It was a lie, but how was she supposed to tell Cho-Cho she was cleaning all day? There wasn't any way she would fall for that. I guess that explains why you seem so exhausted. Come on, we've been waiting for you. Prez is already here. Boruto peered around the booth and grinned. Yo! Prez! Good to see you again. Wah. Boruto-kun. And Sarada. Hey class rep, Sarada said with a weak smile. She had nearly forgotten that the class rep almost always used polite speech. Maybe she shouldn't have agreed to come after all. Please, take a seat. Sarada did her best to sit down causally on the same side of the booth as Mitsuki, but the rate at which her foot flew forward caused her to trip over Boruto's. He caught her easily with one arm and smirked. Excited to see Prez after so long, Sarada? She looked up at him with an unamused glare. You're in the way. So this is what he meant by saving her. He was still going to tease her. She shouldn't have trusted him in the first place. But when he sat down next to her despite it making the booth more cramped, the blush of regret dusted her cheeks. Not only was she brushing shoulders with him, but he was also suffering the embarrassment of potentially getting teased by his friends for sitting close to her when there were other options available. And he was only doing it to be able to whisper to her in case something happened. Shikadai and Inogen pulled up a table and sat down opposite them. And Boruto's strange behavior didn't go unnoticed by Shikadai. So, Prez, what brings you here? Did old man Katasuke finally give you a break? She smiled and ducked her head. Well, actually, I'm here to make preparations for the festival coming up. Dr. Katasuke wanted to put some scientific ninja tools on display to show how useful they are to the public, and even let some kids try out more of the less dangerous ones. We just invented a machine that blows scented bubbles. And a few other things, she said, suddenly embarrassed that she had talked for so long. Sarada mused. Scented bubbles? Sounds like something Himawari would love, commented Boruto, digging into his burger with a grin. If you'd like, please stop by the stall tomorrow. Sarada, who was drinking at the time, barely managed to swallow before saying, okay, as she choked on the remainder of her drink. Boruto's immediate concern did not go unnoticed by the others. Geez, are you alright? You usually don't choke on stuff. He reached over her and grabbed a napkin, subtly whispering, please don't go to the stall tomorrow without me. If he didn't, first thing in the morning, Sarada was going to be at whatever the stall was, unable to control her urge to find it and walk there. He wasn't really sure how to undo it completely, but if he was there when her instinct kicked in, he could find something else to stall her with in order to stop it. Having her out in public, especially in front of Sumire, was going to be more problematic than either of them thought. But Sarada, who had already thought of the perfect solution to every time someone said please, which was of course, a plain and simple please don't, blushed at his response. And this action combined with Boruto's concern and the suspicion from earlier made them look like a couple to everyone present, including the now saddened Sumire. Cho-Cho raised an eyebrow and looked over at Sarada. Isn't your face kinda red? Sarada's face only reddened further when she pointed it out. I think I might have made a mistake and ordered a spicy burger. Mitsuki, who knew exactly what was going on, could only smile. You and Boruto should just switch. You like spicy burgers, don't you, Boruto? Boruto didn't understand why Mitsuki enjoyed torturing him. They were supposed to be friends. If she ordered it, she's going to have to eat it. Besides, I already took a bite out of mine. That would just be swapping germs. Breathing a sigh of relief when the rest of the table seemed to be convinced by his act, he slouched back down and popped a French fry into his mouth. If Sarada really did have a spicy burger, he would have swapped with her. But if there were spicy burgers on the menu to begin with, he would have gotten one, making switching with her completely pointless in the first place. "Didn't you guys just go on a mission recently?" asked Cho-Cho, staring at the three in question across the table. "How was Iwagakure?" Mitsuki smiled. "It was fun." Sarada rolled her eyes. "It was annoying." Boruto smirked. "It was eventful." "Oh?" Inogen leaned over with a snide grin on his face. "Eventful, was it? Mind telling us how so?" "That's a secret," said Boruto, unaware of the position he was putting himself in despite Sarada elbowing him in the ribs, which didn't do anything for their compromising situation. "Didn't you and Sarada go back alone the day after?" Inogen prodded him further, leaning back in his chair and not minding the uncomfortable look on Sumayor's face. "What was that for?" "We went back to help in the investigation of a missing person," replied Sarada as quickly as she could. "Me and Boruto were the only ones who recognized his face. But by the time we got there, he had already escaped. They couldn't tell us until we arrived because we were on the train." "And Mitsuki didn't go with you?" asked Cho-Cho, now becoming equally suspicious of her best friend. "I had something to take care of with my parent." Boruto thanked the heavens that Mitsuki was actually joining in on their cover story. He had been known to blatantly tell the truth in these situations. But perhaps because he had been prohibited from saying the word please, he was just as anxious to get returned to normal as Sarada was. I'm not buying it." "Hey, Sarada, please tell me what actually happened?" "Please don't," said Boruto quickly, causing every eye in the table to fall on him. "What?" "I said it was a secret." "I don't know whether I should be more surprised at how desperately you're trying to hide it, or the fact that you just said please," said Shikadai, eyeing him suspiciously. "Sarada." Sumire looked at her firmly, but a gentle smile remained on her lips. "Did you perhaps come to realize your—" "Ahaha," Sarada laughed, standing up with her tray. "Suddenly I'm not in the mood to eat anymore. I'm going to go home. See you guys later." Boruto stood up to follow her out, but she pushed him back down with a glare that said, "Follow me and you'll just make things worse." He blinked a few times and turned to Mitsuki. But Mitsuki wouldn't be able to stop her. He couldn't even say the word. And if Boruto said it again, out loud, they would catch on. "Please, wait." Sarada halted where she stood at the sound of Sumayor's voice. Sarada, could I maybe talk to you alone for a second?" She knew she had to refuse for the sake of keeping her secret. But from Sumire. Maybe it would be better to tell her to put her mind at ease. But... "Sorry Sumire, the truth is, I wasn't really feeling that well today. I'm just going to go home." She smiled. "That's all right. I understand." Teen Inoshikacho was glaring daggers at Boruto, and he had no idea why. But he was assuming it was for not offering to walk the sick person home, despite coming with her in the first place. If he had put two and two together, he would have figured out it was for something much different than that. But unfortunately, Boruto remained as dense as titanium. "I'll walk you home." "That's it," said Cho-Cho, standing up to get in his way. "Boruto, admit it. You're dating Sarada." "Huh?" "You're being way too nice to her, you're using formal speech. You sat next to her when you got here, and you walked in with her and kept her company while she was training, whatever that meant. Someone confessed on that trip to Iwagakure. Am I wrong?" "Why you're wrong, that's not what." "Then what is it?" "We just..." Sarada sighed, exasperated as blood rushed through her veins. On top of being embarrassed, she was also tired from cleaning, didn't want to go out of the house in the first place, and now, she was lying to her friends. All for the sake of keeping one thing secret. One thing that she knew Cho-Cho would ask her if she got the chance. But now, if she was going to be suspected anyway, she might as well tell the truth. I got hypnotized, okay? The rest of the people in the restaurant look over at her, some whispering, some crinkling their noses at her loud disruptive voice. It hasn't worn off yet, and it's really annoying, and I didn't want anyone else to take advantage of me, so I was trying to keep it secret, but I spent all morning cleaning and now I'm tired and I just want to go home. She walked out of Kaminari Burger, practically in tears. She was going to have to lock herself up until that stupid festival. The rest of the people in the restaurant sat, stunned, looking at each other like they had just done something terribly wrong. Boruto gritted his teeth and stood up. I'll go after her. Boruto-kun? Sumeyer's worried glance paused him momentarily, but he offered her a gentle smile and stood to his feet. Sorry class prez, I was the one that forced her out. It's more fun when everyone's together, you know? I thought she'd be okay with going out if it was just with friends. But I ended up making her do something she didn't want to. He put his arms behind his head. She's probably going to hit me. You know, and you're going to go anyway? Boruto blinked over at Inogen. Despite her personality, she gets really depressed if she's left alone like that. And besides, she's already hit me a ton. This time, it's actually my fault. As Boruto picked up both of their trays and discarded the remains in the trash, he had several pairs of eyes staring at him in amusement. It didn't take long for Boruto to find Sarada, roped into helping some random shop owner who needed to lift a heavy box. The store owner was clearly surprised that someone who was crying and also rather tiny was helping him lift something 5 times her size and weight. But it didn't surprise Boruto. With a sigh, he walked over and took it out of her hands, struggling to keep his knees from giving out. Where do you want this, mister? HM? Over there is fine. Thank you. He set the crate down and turned, expecting her to make some sort of snide remark, but Sarada was already gone. Letting his eyelids fall in annoyance, he looked around the general area and saw no one. So instead of continuing his pointless search on the ground, he used the stand's roof as a foothold and leapt on top of the building. As he suspected, she was there, curled into a ball. Sarada. Idiot. She mumbled into her knees. Why'd you come after me? He walked over to her and stood in front of her, crouching down. Not putting much emotion into it, he blandly said the word, sorry. If you're going to apologize, at least do it right. This is all your fault, you know? He breathed in and ducked his head to the ground. Sorry. I shouldn't have convinced you to go when you were like this. And I should have waited in that line with you to get this fixed. I didn't think it would turn out to be that much of a problem. Boruto turned his head to the side, bangs flopped against the concrete, and peeked underneath of her folded arms into her glassy eyes, his neck at an awkward angle, cheeks squished against the ground. Will you forgive me? Sarada couldn't help but laugh. It was for reasons like this. Even though he was an idiot and got on her nerves. The only reason she was good at hiding it was because she had been hiding it for a long time. Fine. But I'm not leaving the house again. Not until you confirm that stupid psychic is at the festival. He smiled back, rolling onto his back and looking up at the sky. Deal. But why didn't you want anyone else to know? I don't think anyone but me would use it against you, you know. She couldn't tell him. Not about the question that Cho-Cho would inevitably ask. Don't you think Shikadai would come up with some elaborate plan to make me do something awful? I wouldn't let him, he said, lifting his head up and leaning back to sit next to her. She laughed, her tears drying with the breeze. Since when were you able to outsmart Shikadai? Hey, I could if I tried. He stood to his feet and held out his hand, then noticed the expression on her face was still cold. That's not what you're really worried about, is it? Don't say please and force it out of me. The corner of his mouth pulled into a half smile. If I didn't do it earlier, I wouldn't do it now. Come on, let's get you home before you're forced to carry an old woman across the street. I can get there myself, you know, she replied, pink dusting her tear-stained cheeks. But this time, it wasn't from crying. Come on, Sarada, you asked me personally before we left the house. He followed after her, leaping from one rooftop to the next. And besides, I'm just selfishly following you anyways. Now we're even. If you stalking me on my way home makes you think we're even, you're dead wrong, you know. Oi! Don't steal my catchphrase, Boruto called after her, pausing to leap up with his fist in the air, Shinaro. Before she knew it, the depression that had been making her feel so heavy she could hardly jump had all but disappeared into laughter, her feet as light as a feather as she jumped from roof to roof. Later that night, Boruto was sitting in bed, playing Superhero Ninja Battle 2 under the covers. It was 11:59. He was in the middle of beating the final boss. With a smash and a crack, he swung his pixelated flaming katana over the monster's head. Yes. It was a silently mouthed victory, but still a victory nonetheless. Shikadai was right. The fun in beating games definitely came from hiding under the blankets and away from your mom. And in that moment, a knock on the door scared him out of his pants. He shut off the game console and threw it under his stomach, laying on top of it to block the light and simultaneously pretend like he had been asleep the entire time. This time the knock wasn't so nice. But it wasn't the sound of someone knocking on wood. It was the sound of someone knocking on glass. Boruto. The whispered hiss could only belong to one person. Boruto shot out of bed. Sarada? Open the window. Hurry. Before I accidentally break it. He furrowed his eyebrows and blinked back the wave of darkness that came with standing up too quickly. Making his way to his tiny bedroom window, he slapped his palm against it and tugged up his loose pants with the other hand. What are you doing here? She sighed. It's tomorrow. Tomorrow? The festival isn't for another 2 days. What are you? In the restaurant, she interrupted in a loud whisper, hands barely able to resist dragging his arm towards his door. You told me not to go to the stall without you tomorrow. It's tomorrow. And I'm apparently trying to go to that stall with you. Even though I don't know where it is. Boruto blinked a few times and hissed back, stop please. Sarada stopped. She breathed a sigh of relief. The urge to do everything simply left her. I'm going home. Wait. He reached out and put his hand on her arm, heart pounding from nearly getting dragged out of bed and taken to some random location in the middle of the night. It's midnight. And my mom is going to kill me if she knows I'm awake. Then you'd better go back to sleep. Sarada. What? I'm not just going to let you go home by yourself. What if some weird drunk guy asks you to do something? She crinkled her nose. There were no drunk guys on the way here. I'll just jump on the rooftops. You're going to wake people up. If they were going to get woken up, they would have already woken up. I jumped from roof to roof on the way here. He sighed. Just wait. I'll put my jacket on and go with you. Why are you so insistent? Why are you so stubborn? Suddenly, the door opened. Sarada-chan? Sarada and Boruto both blinked at the form of Hinata, standing in the doorway in her day clothes as if she hadn't even attempted to sleep. Hey, Auntie Hinata. What are you doing here, at this hour? Oh, you know, she said, looking around Boruto's room for an excuse. She was giving me back my game console, said Boruto suddenly, eyeing it on his bed. You know how addicting they are. I didn't think you were the type to play video games, Sarada-chan. If that's the case, why don't you stay over? It's already late. Mom. I'll message her mother. She's not 5 anymore, Boruto protested, I'll just walk her home. Alright, fine. Hinata yawned. Boruto, make sure you get her home properly. And quiet when you come back. Your sister is sleeping. He doesn't have to walk me home, Auntie Hinata, I can. No, it's okay. Please, let him walk you home. I insist. Boruto knew on both ends, there was no use arguing. Throwing on his black jacket, he followed Sarada out the door. The night wind chilled him through his jacket. He brought his hands up to his arms and shivered. Since when was Konoha so cold? Who knows, she said, staring up at the moon. Are you really going to walk me all the way home? Boruto narrowed his eyes, raised an eyebrow, and stopped walking. Sarada found that her own feet also stopped moving. She sighed. But you could just tell me to go home by myself and I would. Don't wanna. He shoved his hands in his pockets and looked the other way. All of a sudden, a shrill girly scream echoed through the town. With one look at Sarada, Boruto nodded his head and they both raced off towards the direction of the yell. Help, save me. A rather elegantly dressed young woman waved a rolled-up paper in front of her face. A man was slowly closing in on her, a kitchen knife in his hands. The street lamp illuminated their bodies, casting shadows onto the brick walls on either side of them. Come on, said the man, just give me whatever is in that pretty little purse of yours, and I'll let you go. Please, save me. Before Boruto could blink, Sarada was running twice his speed, Sharingan activated. She threw a punch at the man, but he dodged and swung the knife upwards towards her lower jaw. Boruto reached behind him, but felt no ninja tool pouch, and cursed his luck. Sarada! He threw himself forward to protect her despite knowing he wouldn't make it in time, but thankfully, Sarada was able to dodge, albeit narrowly, with the prediction from her Sharingan, and continued running in a direct line to the woman. Boruto weaved a few signs and thrust his palm forward, wind swirling through the air around it. Wind style. Gale palm. The man nimbly leapt out of the way with the practiced skill of a jonin and extended his thumb and pinky finger. Boruto knew the motion all too well. Sarada. She was rushing head-on into an unknown battle and narrowly avoiding attacks. This one would clearly hit her at point-blank range, and yet she was still rushing towards it. Or rather, the woman behind the man, without a second thought. What are you doing? Get back! He barely managed to form a plus with his index and middle fingers before the man grabbed hold of a small scroll and squeezed his hand into a fist. Shadow Paralysis Jutsu. One clone materialized just outside the light of the street lamp. But he, Sarada, and the women were now frozen, trapped in the shadow under their feet. Boruto's shadow clone snuck backwards, waiting for an opportunity to attack. But the attacker prepared another jutsu, the metal of Boruto's least favorite scientific ninja tool gleaming on his wrist. Boruto launched forward and threw a disappearing Rasengan, but not before the man could squeeze the tiny scroll into his palm. Sure den. Everyone within the shadow was struck by a strong current of purple lightning, shocking their insides and making their limbs feel tingly and numb. While the shadow paralysis jutsu was undone, Boruto found himself unable to move. But luckily, the clone he had materialized managed to make its mark. The effects weren't as strong as he would have liked them to be, but the vanishing Rasengan still hit the man in the shoulder with a satisfying invisible impact. Gay. Darn ninja brats. The man, likely in his 30s, picked himself up off the ground and dusted off his pants. Sarada struggled to stand to her feet and crouched into a fighting stance. Boruto watched, wondering how on earth she could move, when he remembered the girl's command to save her. She must have used the word please. That gave him an idea. Knowing she couldn't move well, if even at all, Boruto picked up his head from the ground and struggled to his knees. The man released another scroll, and this time, Boruto noted it was red in color. Sarada, please use Fireball Jutsu. Weaving signs faster than his eyes could follow, Sarada instantly released a giant ball of flame to counter the flame that shot from the man's wrist piece. The two fireballs collided in midair and set a showering burst of ash and flame up towards the sky. Boruto found himself ducking from the sheer intensity of the heat, and hoped the woman was still alright. In moments, the man was firing off another jutsu. This time, the scroll was brown. Suspecting an earth wall to separate both of them from the man, he desperately formed 4 shadow clones with his tingling fingers and used 2 to throw his real body in the direction of the girls. Earth wall incoming. Please punch it when it pops up. Roger that, said Sarada, Sharingan still activated. She pulled back her fist as the man slammed his hands into the ground and punched through the massive earth wall. Shanaroo. His body sailed through the crumbling wall of earth and his hand sent a gale palm into the man's back. He coughed as his front hit the concrete building, and upon regaining his footing, he tried to swing his knife at the clones in defense. But they only vanished into clouds of smoke. And then he turned towards Sarada. She gritted her teeth. Boruto. Hurry up and order me before I take this woman and get away from here. Please dodge and forget about saving that lady. Throwing her body to the side just as the knife passed by her shoulder, it left a small cut in its wake. Boruto inhaled sharply and turned to the man, quickly materializing 2 shadow clones. They charged him and palmed his chest with an electric shock, leaving him limp and heaving for breaths on the ground. Suddenly, the roar of a beast sounded in Boruto's ears. He jerked his head to the left to see Sumire riding new, her eyes clearly searching for the man that had taken one of her professor's tools. Over here! Sumire immediately turned at the sound of his voice, eyes widening when he saw him in front of another unconscious woman. Boruto-kun? That's the guy you're looking for, he said, struggling to stand to his feet as he pointed to where his shadow clones had just immobilized him. This girl needs to get to a hospital. She got hit with purple lighting and probably fainted from shock. Katasuke rounded the corner, skidding on one foot. Sumire-chan. Did you find the young lord? But Boruto's eyes weren't caring about Katasuke in that moment. Sarada was slowly losing consciousness, her eyelids flickering shut. After forcing her body to move in ways it shouldn't have been able to on pure instinct and adrenaline, she was going to pass out. Sarada! Just as her knees went limp, Boruto found himself by her side, catching her. Relief washed over him and took away some of the tingling numbness in his limbs. As he set her gently against the brick wall behind her, he turned his attention to Sumire as she hopped off of new. How did he get a hold of the shinobi kote in the first place? And then he saw a blue scroll ejected from the tool on the man's wrist, and he used his remaining willpower to squeeze it into his palm. Water release, Orca. Water erupted from the man's hand. Boruto cursed under his breath and quickly shielded Sarada from the majority of the water as it flooded around him. Nu stood in front of Sumire, who had her hands up over her head. And Katasuke was standing at the ready, absorbing all the water with a giant contraption on his arm. Boruto looked over his shoulder when the water level died down much faster than he had expected it to. Old man Katasuke. What is that? He closed the metallic fingers of the new machine with a triumphant smile and pushed up his glasses with the other hand. It's a prototype for a new invention I want to test out at the festival. Those aliens who absorbed jutsu got me thinking it would be possible to create a tool that did just that. And here we have it. I haven't decided what to name it yet. Would you like to help me, young lord? Boruto shook his head. More importantly, you have to get her to a hospital, he said, motioning to the collapsed woman that Katasuke had managed to protect. Sumire and Nu were already taking care of the thief, the arm that held the scientific ninja tool pressed to the wall above his head. And take that guy to my dad. Or the police. One of the two. Sumire nodded and then looked down at Sarada, who was now resting in Boruto's arms. Hey, Boruto-kun. He didn't look up, the concern evident in the way his eyebrows were slightly lifted and his lingering gaze on the cut that sliced Sarada's arm. It's nothing. Sorry. I'll get this guy to the police. Thanks for taking care of it, he said, finally looking up at her as he heaved Sarada onto his back. Are you sure you're okay to take her by yourself? Boruto looked over his shoulder and grinned. Yeah, it's fine. Her mom will fix her up once I get her home. One visit to Auntie Sakura is faster than going to the hospital anyway, you know. Sumire smiled softly and heaved the thief up on top of Nu. I see. Be careful on your way home, Boruto. You too, he said, walking away with Sarada on his back. Boruto made it back to Sarada's house and trudged up the stairs to her apartment on the 3rd story. You should really stop going to those sweet shops with Cho-Cho, he mumbled, his legs aching. Carrying her was one thing. Carrying her full limp body weight after being hit by powerful lightning was another. When he made it to the door and knocked, Sakura was wide awake, somewhat expecting Sasuke. But when she saw Boruto with Sarada on her back, her eyebrows furrowed. Boruto? What happened? I forgot to cancel a command she heard earlier today about going to see something, and we ran into some trouble on the way home. She hurt her arm a little. I see, said Sakura, stepping aside so he could carry her in and set her on the couch. When he turned to leave, Sakura rolled her eyes. Sit down and let me check you out as well. Knowing you, you have Naruto's stubbornness, but I know you don't heal as fast as him. I'm fine, he said, but when Sakura made a grunting noise in his throat, Boruto knew he wasn't going to be able to refuse until he was checked out. He reluctantly sat down on the couch at Sarada's feet. So? Has she forgiven you for using this whole hypnotism thing against her? Boruto blinked a few times as the glowing green energy from Sakura's hand closed Sarada's knife wound. Sarada? Who else would I be talking about? He looked at his knees. Probably not. I really messed up this time. Sakura smiled as she gently laid her daughter back and demanded, with a smile, that Boruto take off his jacket. He reluctantly removed it, her green eyes scanning him for injury. You know, out of everyone she's around, she talks about you the most. Somehow the comment made him feel embarrassed. Pink crept up onto his cheeks as his eyes narrowed. It's just her complaining about annoying stuff I do, isn't it? She laughed. Most of the time, yes. But most of the time, Sarada only gets angry because she's worried. He blinked again and shrugged his jacket back on. Worried? Sakura put her hand on his arm and began healing his disturbed chakra network from the lighting. I knew you had some sort of injury. It's things like this. With your father, there was never any need to worry. He could get stabbed in the stomach and recover in a few seconds. But you're not invincible, you know. My dad can get stabbed and be alright? You didn't know, did you? The Nine Tails chakra inside him heals him insanely fast. Not that I recommend stabbing your father to test it out. It still hurts, of course. But he's been stabbed through with several pulls and pinned to the ground. I think that was even when your mother confessed to him. During that fight with pain. Boruto's jaw dropped. And then he furrowed his eyebrows. Mom confessed to him when he was getting stabbed? She tried to save him. And then she got thrown into the ground headfirst, and your father was so enraged he nearly manifested all 9 tails before he could control Kurama. But that isn't the point. Sakura stood up and rocked her shoulder back around in circles. Could you carry Sarada upstairs and put her in bed for me? I'm sore from leaning over people all day. Boruto averted his gaze, a faint blush still dusting his cheeks. But when he stood to his feet, he realized carrying her wasn't going to be as much of a chore now that his body was healed. As he looked down at her, one more thought, or rather, an excuse that Sarada always used popped into his head. Wait. But isn't Sarada just worried I'll ruin her chance at being the Hokage? I don't think she's worried about me. Like that. That used to be the case, back when you were in school. But now she's worried that your recklessness is going to get you seriously injured. And if anything, you'll help her chances at becoming the Hokage, Boruto. You're the perfect rivals, just like Naruto and Sasuke back in the day. Rivals, thought Boruto, removing Sarada's shoes and setting them on the floor before lifting her into his arms. I never really thought of it like that before. The thought in his mind rose into a different question as he laid her back in bed, the moonlight shining through the window. Then how have I been thinking about it up until now? He gently removed the glasses from her face, folded them, and placed them on her nightstand. Then he took off her shoes and put them by her door. Thanks to her likely jolting out of bed at midnight, the blankets were still pushed to the side, making it easy to cover her up. It should have been her mom's job to tuck her in, but something told him Sakura wasn't going to come back up the stairs, so he took the edge of the blankets and tossed them lazily over top of her. With a sigh, he furrowed his eyebrows as he watched her mumble something in her sleep and roll onto her side. She was on the same team as him and with Mitsuki, but they had a sort of trust built up between each other before that. Everything changed when she became a bossy honors student, and they began to hate each other. But after working together again, were they friends? Or rivals, like Sakura had said? And why did the mystic say he would be doing him a favor by placing Sarada under some sort of hypnotism? He thought it was so he could tease her, but what in the future would make the ability to order her around helpful? Other than possibly, the fight they had just encountered. But the future the mystic man was looking at was far beyond that, wasn't he? The moon took on a blue hue, the curtains billowing in the wind as he opened the sliding door that led onto the balcony. And then he remembered something she had said after the Chunin exams. It was probably one of the only times Sarada had ever made him blush. Just like I thought. Your eyes are bluer than the seventh's. Half of him wondered why on earth she had been thinking about that in the first place, while the other half felt incredibly embarrassed that she had gotten so close to his face and had been staring at him so intently. And then there was his reaction to her getting hurt. He thought it was the same as anyone, but it was different with Mitsuki. Seeing Mitsuki about to get injured made him jolt, but his body didn't practically teleport to protect him like it did with her. Boruto closed the sliding glass door and leaned up against it, blinking lazily at her sleeping figure. She was the easiest person to tease, and getting a rise out of her made his day. But she was also the only one who could understand him and throw his words back at him when he didn't follow his own advice. He hated to admit it, but out of all the people in the class, she was the one he trusted the most. If they were going into a fight, there wasn't anyone he wanted more to watch his back. He didn't have to tell her his plan for her to know what he was thinking. They shared a sort of special connection with their fathers being pretty much absent from their lives, and their identities as the hero's kids. For a time, most people didn't call them Boruto and Sarada. It was the Uchiha girl and the Hokage's son. But she was usually around in times he wanted to complain about being lonely. His birthday. Most of his pranks. Heck, his dad was even walking around with Himawari on Parents' Day, and he promised to spend it training with her. Sasuke ended up coming in the end. But she still took the time to reflect his own words back at him and make sure he didn't regret spending the day away from his dad. And suddenly, looking at her lying there asleep made his face feel warm. She talks about you more than anyone else. He turned around and left, feet landing lightly on the rooftop across from hers as he walked down the side, hands in his pockets, a slight blush dusting his cheeks. Dang it, Auntie Sakura. Why'd you have to tell me all that? Boruto arrived home that night to his mother being worried and concerned that he hadn't come back. He explained about the scream for help and the man that had stolen one of Katasuke's ninja tools, and how he and Sarada fought him off and some iron Katasuke showed up and apprehended them. Hinata responded that if Sarada came over that late again, she was just going to spend the night, which to her surprise, made Boruto rather flustered. The day of the festival came around before anyone knew it, and Boruto had somewhat gone back to normal. Shikadai asked him about the whole hypnotism business, to which he responded, she doesn't really want anyone to know the details for whatever reason. Shikadai, using his reasoning skills, deducted that the word was please, and Boruto made him promise not to tell anyone. But Boruto, he had said, his eyes narrowed. Doesn't that make it dangerous for her to be around large groups of people? He nodded his head and explained that the mystic only showed up at festivals. It would be a lot more convenient if you could use the command to undo itself. He narrowed his eyes, trying to figure out some way to make the wording work. But no matter what he thought of, he couldn't find a phrase that would encompass everything. Please don't react to the word please? Please don't do anything when someone says please? It just didn't seem probable. He showed up on her doorstep around dusk, and to his surprise, Cho-Cho was there wearing a kimono. Cho-Cho? Huh? Boruto, what are you doing here? He blinked a few times, and then blushed, realizing him standing in front of Sarada's house alone before a festival that they were attending as a friend group seemed rather boyfriendish. Cho-Cho would likely only emphasize that fact. I'm here to pick up Sarada. You know. Because of the whole hypnosis thing. So I can make sure to stop her before she does anything she doesn't want to do. Since you know, we're going to be in a large crowd of people and all. She hummed, staring at him under half-lidded eyes. I see. I can't believe she actually agreed to wear a full-blown kimono, said Cho-Cho, waiting with eyes sparking at the door. Make sure you tell her she looks good in it. Boruto laughed, knowing Cho-Cho had likely used the word please when begging Sarada to put one on. If I did, she would just. Sorry I'm late, it took longer than I thought to tie the stupid. Obi. Sarada trailed off when she saw Boruto there, frozen and staring at her. His normal reaction would have been to make fun of her instantly or turn around and put his arms behind his head, starting to walk forward and apologizing for interrupting. But he was just standing there. Staring at her. Why yo, he said awkwardly, putting his hand up to the back of his head. I didn't realize Cho-Cho was coming to pick you up. I'll just. Come with us, said Sarada, almost immediately, ducking her head to hide her face to hide her bangs. But they never fell in front of her face. The red flower hair clip that adorned her hair was pinning them back. And he saw her blush. We have to look for that mystic's tent anyway. The sooner I get this undone, the better. All right. Cho-Cho smiled, pulling out a bag of potato chips from her sleeve and popping it open. Sarada, you look nice. Don't you think, Boruto? Yeah. I mean, much like his mother's used to, his face turned as red as a cherry tomato. Sarada only turned away as Cho-Cho crunched on potato chips with a smirk. Most girls look nice when they dress up. I guess I'm not an exception. It's been a while since I've seen you in girly clothes. Sorry. Boruto shoved his hands in his pockets. I forgot you actually knew how to look like one. He felt the hard fwink of her finger flicking the back of his head, and just like that, the awkward dissipated. Don't hurt me, we have to find that stupid man. Or, he smirked, I could enjoy teasing you again while it lasts. He put his hands up to avoid being punched and turned to walk on the other side of her so that she was in between her and Cho-Cho. I am so going to make him put some sort of stupid something on you for the rest of the night, Sarada mumbled under her breath. What are you even going to make me do? She thought, her long kimono sleeve dangling down as she raised it to her chin. I think I'll make you call me Sarada-senpai, Bawana-de-jiza in front of Irika-sensei, Shino-sensei, and your father, and apologize for pulling pranks all the time, and shout I love letting Himawari paint my fingernails at the top of your lungs. That was one time. The horrified look on his face brought a smirk to hers. And how did you even know about that? She leaned back, chin up as she continued walking, her Geta sandals clicking against the concrete. I was sitting across from you in Kaminari Burger and I'd bits of color on the skin around them. Blue would be a good color for you, Boruto. Don't you think, Cho-Cho? Of course. She responded, high-fiving her best friend. Gay. I should just leave you alone and let your wallet suffer at the hands of all those street vendors. Said Sarada, I might be forced to buy them, but I'm sure Cho-Cho wouldn't mind eating the food for me, she said, watching as her friend left her side and ran towards a takoyaki stall. The crowds thickened around them, pushing them closer together. Hey! Sarada! You gotta come over here and try this takoyaki. It smells so good. As Cho-Cho pushed forward, someone else held out a sample to Sarada. Miss, please try our ultra-spicy yakiniku. Sarada reached out her hand to take one, horrified at the thought of it entering her mouth. But before she could fall prey to the urge not to resist, Boruto leaned over and stole the chicken. He shifted it to his cheek and whispered, "Please don't," before going back to his normal positioning and chewing happily. "Mm. This is delicious. Where is your stall?" The lady pointed behind her with a smile. "Please, buy some if you'd like." Sarada's legs moved before she could stop them, but Boruto reached out and took her hand, pulling her backwards with a forced grin. "Please wait," he said, taking out his wallet. "I'll get it for you." To the girl, it seemed like Boruto had stolen his girlfriend's chicken and was off to buy her some as a replacement, and it was very sweet. But Sarada was breathing a sigh of relief that Boruto had just saved her from getting her mouth lit up by spice. But as he walked up to the yakiniku cart, she blushed at the realization that he was still holding her hand. "Boruto? Your hand. Oh. It'll be easier to stop you if I can just pull you back," he said, leaving it connected as they stood in line. "What, you're not embarrassed, are you?" he teased with a knowing smirk. She ducked her head, her face warming up along with her hand. After his accidental sip-up and calling her pretty, she was rather embarrassed, to say the least. And then there was the fact that she had been forced to wear a kimono because Cho-Cho said please, and they had gotten separated from her, and now, they really did look like boyfriend and girlfriend because his attempts to stop her from acting like a maniac required him to play a similar role. "Sarada?" Boruto wasn't exactly expecting her to clam up. "Let's just go look for this stupid tent," she said, dragging him along before he could even buy the spicy chicken skewer. They walked for a little while with no luck until they ran into Mitsuki. Sarada felt like she hadn't seen him in ages. And, well, it really had been ages. "Mitsuki. Oh, hi Boruto. Sarada. I was looking for that tent. I haven't found it yet, but I'll let you know if I see anything." "Mitsuki, wait." But Sarada's call fell on deaf ears. She turned around, and to her surprise, Mitsuki looked at her hand in Boruto's, and then winked. Mitsuki just winked at her. Mitsuki. The person who failed to read the air in nearly every situation that required it. Just winked. She wanted to crumple to her knees. Her hand was beginning to get cold and sweaty, and no one had used the word please for a while. "Hey Boruto, can you?" "Miss. How would you and your boyfriend like to try goldfish scooping? You could win a pretty necklace." "Be boyfriend?" Sarada stuttered. But her eyes trailed to the necklace. It wasn't like her to wear jewelry, but this necklace had a small flame on it, and it reminded her of her dad and the will of fire. A suitable accessory for someone who dreamed of becoming Hokage. "Hey Sarada," Boruto said, eyeing her with a grin, "if I get that for you, will you forgive me for all this other stuff?" "Oh? What did you do to need forgiveness, young man?" "Heh," said Boruto, mild public embarrassment. The old man smiled. "Then I'll let you go one for free." "Really?" "Sure." With that, he handed Boruto a scoop. As Boruto let go of Sarada's hand and bent down over the water, the old man leaned over to Sarada to whisper. "I gave him the special scoop that makes it so you can't get anything," he chuckled, watching as Boruto intently stared at the fish swimming in the box of water. "Maybe we can get some payback for your public humiliation." Sarada laughed. "Wouldn't that be nice?" Boruto timed it perfectly, but the fish broke right through the paper at the center of the scoop. "Gay. Old man, is this rigged?" It practically disintegrated. Next to him, a little boy scooped up a goldfish. "Look mommy, I got one." Boruto's jaw dropped at the little kid and pulled out his wallet. "Mister. One more time." She had to laugh. Boruto hated to lose. To anyone. Be it little kids, or her. His hatred of losing was one of the reasons he paid attention to his mom's lessons so he wouldn't have to pay attention in school. And so, she watched as he attempted scoop after scoop, all of them ending in failure. Like a sore loser, he tucked his wallet back into his pocket and to her surprise, took her by the hand. "Come on, Sarada, let's go. We have a tent to find anyway." "HM? You're looking for a tent?" asked the old man, blinking a few times. Both of them turned around. "Old man, you know where we can find one?" "Well, I suppose I could tell you what I know, after you graciously spent so much money at my stall." He laughed. "There's a tent belonging to a traveling mystic down the road and to the right a ways. Oh, and right before it, there's a..." "Thanks, old man." He chuckled and held out his hand with a smile. "Please, wait." Sarada halted where she stood, and Boruto's hand slipped right out of hers. He leaned in to whisper the alternate command in her ear, but the man was holding out a heart necklace on a silver chain. "Take it. I was planning to give it to you anyway." "I really couldn't." "Please, I insist." Sarada reached out and took the necklace, suddenly blushing at her actions. But when Boruto picked up her hand and intertwined their fingers, she started blushing for a different reason. "Thanks, old man." "Boruto," she whispered, clutching the necklace to her chest as they walked away. "Why are you?" "Hands," she mumbled, not able to even look in his general direction. "Ah. Mine were kinda wet from goldfish scooping and I figured it wouldn't do any good if you could slip away from me when someone demands something of you like you just did a few seconds ago, so..." Even he would admit, this was kinda embarrassing. "Oh, okay. But can we stop so I can put this necklace on? I'm afraid I'm going to drop it if I hold into it." He paused and let go of her hand. "Go ahead." "Sorry." Reaching up, Sarada worked at the clasp with her fingers, but without looking, she just couldn't get it lined up. Do you want some help?" Head ducked, she squeezed her eyes shut. "I think I got it." But after 3 more attempts, Boruto walked around behind her and gently took it out of her hands. Of course, the action made her fingers brush against his, which for some reason, now made her incredibly nervous. She could see her heartbeat through her kimono as he worked at the clasp of the necklace and she held up her short hair, the backs of his fingers grazing her neck every once in a while. "This stupid thing is really hard to undo." He must have moved closer to see the clasp better because she could feel his breath on her neck. She held her own breath, just waiting for the moment to be over. After this, they could go see the mystic and undo what he had done. Then they wouldn't have to hold hands. Then she could go find Cho-Cho again and walk around with her. Then she wouldn't feel like her face was on fire. But just as Boruto triumphantly said "got it," and went around to link hands with her again, a troubled voice made Sarada freeze. "Boruto-kun?" Boruto's nervous hands had been working at the clasp, noting that Sarada likely couldn't clasp it for the same reason. It wasn't that the clasp was hard to undo. It was the fact that both of them were being flustered idiots. He couldn't help it. He was trying to protect her. And gosh darn it, that kimono looked good on her. It had been so long since he'd seen her in one, he almost forgot what she looked like. But it had a similar design to the one she always wore when they were kids. The base color of the fabric was white around the neck and shoulders, fading into red flowers with a black background past the obi and towards the ends of the sleeves. The fern green obi hugged her tiny waist. She even had her bangs pulled back with some sort of poofy red flower with tons of petals. He could have sworn he saw a hint of mascara on her eyelashes, and lip gloss on her lips. In contrast to her usual tomboyish zip-up vest with shorts, arm sleeves, and boots, she actually looked like a girl, and with all the other stuff he had been thinking about lately, just looking at her was preventing him from thinking straight. But he wasn't going to let her know that. He was glad he had an excuse to hold her hand, because it made it easier to track where she was so he didn't have to look over at her. If he didn't look, he could just imagine her in normal clothes. Not that imagining her in normal clothes made holding her hand any less embarrassing. And it made it even more embarrassing when he realized she was actually embarrassed. When he finally got the clasp after what felt like forever, he was ready to go to the tent and get all of this undone. He just wanted his stupid heart to calm down and stop pounding a mile a minute so he could focus on the comebacks he was making and not on the way her hand fit snugly into his. And then he heard Samire. And he thought the world was going to end. She had seen his awkward attempt at putting the necklace on her. And his red face. And she could easily tell Shikadai and Inogen, or even worse, Cho-Cho, about it. Boruto, Kuon? He slowly turned around, Sarada's hand frantically disconnecting from his as she attempted to hide behind her bangs. Hey, Samire. Sorry for interrupting. This looked bad. He wanted to explain, if only to stop anyone from teasing him, but what came out was, Samire. She turned around, her eyes somewhat glassy. Boruto fidgeted awkwardly with his empty hand. Don't tell anyone about what you just saw. Samire looked at Sarada, who was frozen and unable to move. Samire, it's not what it looks like. Sarada, she said, on the verge of tears, eyeing the heart-shaped necklace on Sarada's neck, next time someone asks you a question, please answer it truthfully. You said. She trailed off and ducked her head. Never mind. Have fun at the festival, Sarada. Boruto Kuon. Prez? Boruto looked at Sarada, who looked absolutely miserable and couldn't figure out what on earth was going on. Was Samire mad at Sarada for lying about something? If so, what? Was it yesterday, when they said they weren't a couple? That wasn't a lie. And he didn't think Samire and Sarada were that close. I mean, he knew they were friends, but Cho-Cho was the one who would get mad at Sarada for not telling her something like that. And she wouldn't cry. Boruto, she said finally, her sandals touching together on the ground. I think you should go explain what happened to me to Samire. I'm going to go to the tent and get this reversed. But before she could step away, someone came up to her. Miss. Please, don't look so sad, here, have a candy apple. She took it before she could comprehend what was going on and tried to run away, but Boruto caught her hand. Please put the apple back, he whispered, and Sarada gratefully handed it to the woman. Sorry, I don't need one. Thank you though. The woman took one look at the serious look on Boruto's face and ducked her head, then walked away. Don't go by yourself, he said, taking her hand, you need someone to go with you. She looked away. Don't hold my hand, she said through gritted teeth, pulling away from him. He didn't understand. Everything had been going well until Samire showed up. He thought maybe Sarada was starting to like him enough to forgive him for all of this. She was putting up with it. They were going to go and fix her hypnosis, then enjoy the festival with everyone. So why? Why did she look so hurt? Sarada. Let's just go, she said, walking away with her head facing the ground. Just as she was about to reach the tent, she bumped straight into Cho-Cho. There you are, I was looking for you. Sarada tilted her head up, horror written all over her face. Boruto noted it and walked up beside her, casting her a worried glance. For some reason, she'd been avoiding Cho-Cho since all this happened. But she didn't make any move to try and run away. Before he could throw out a question to redirect Cho-Cho's attention to him, she eyed the necklace and then looked back at Boruto. Don't tell me. You confessed. Ha! I knew it. Sarada, you've got to spill it now. How long have you liked him? Since I was 3. The words came out of her mouth without her consent. Boruto's heart skipped several beats, and then his concern turned into wide-eyed shock. What? Sarada was covering her mouth, tears spilling out the sides of her eyes. But Boruto's mind was rapid-fire processing the words she had just said, clearly without anyone saying please, over and over and over again in his mind. Since she was 3. Since she was 3. She's liked me since she was 3. There's no way. And then he remembered what Samire had said before she ran away. Next time someone asks you a question, Please, answer it truthfully. That was why she didn't want Cho-Cho to find out about her hypnosis. Because girls asked personal questions like these, and she could force her to say it. Boruto knew Sarada would rather die than admit she liked him in any way, shape, or form. But before he could get anything out of his mouth, Sarada was running away, her sandals discarded. Sarada! He scooped up her sandals and ran after her, leaving a shocked Cho-Cho to wonder what on earth she had just done. But Boruto knew exactly where she was headed. And he had to catch her before she got there. Sarada made a beeline for the tent, disregarding the line of people that stood in front of it. She was inches away from reaching the flap when she heard a command. Please, stop! Cursing herself, she desperately took stubborn steps forward, but it was no use. Her will to stop was stronger. He caught up to her, panting, and took her arm. Come with me. No, she said, fighting against his grip. Please, come with me. Hot tears streamed down her face as she silently followed behind him. She'd never hear the end of this. His voice was already ringing out in her head. You really should be nicer to me, you know? Considering that you have a crush on me and all. She could deny it. She could say that she didn't anymore, and she would never like him again. But Boruto didn't seem like he was going to make fun of her, and that was more terrifying than accidentally confessing. He led her to a quiet place, an overlook for fireworks on a hillside. It was still 3 hours before they would start to end the festival, but there were a few people here and there, already spreading out blankets to get a good look. But they passed by the hillside, finding their way into the woods, leaping up into a tree away from the festival. From everything. Finally finding her will to speak, it came out in an outburst. Why did you bring me here? Idiot. Stupid. I didn't mean it, so let me go. Sarada. Boruto, please, You, he said, curling his fingers into his palm. His voice softened. Why are you crying? She looked off to the side, avoiding his eyes. If I don't tell you, you're just going to force it out of me. This isn't fair. He gently let go of her arm, his gaze averted. I'm not going to force it out of you, you know? But if she would have just looked up, she would have seen how red his face was, and how nervous he was to even be up in a tree alone with her in the first place. If she took the time to think, she would have realized that he was trying to save her the embarrassment of crying in a crowd of people or explaining what she said to Cho-Cho. But she had her head buried in her hands. I'll just get that stupid mystic to make you forget I ever said anything. And for the record, I really hate you right now. The question that came out of his mouth next wasn't exactly what she was expecting. She was expecting him to make fun of her, to tease her, to laugh at her. Something. So when he asked the simple question, what if I don't want to forget, her breath caught in her throat. Huh? Now she saw it. His face was red, his eyes averted and narrowed, the typical look of teenage boy embarrassment at his own question. I just wanted to know. Just in case. I mean. Ruffling his own hair in defeat, he stared at the tree branch under their feet. Never mind. I'm sorry. I'll ask the mystic to make me forget. But if I promise to forget. He clenched his fist, finally lifting his head. Do you really? I mean. Like that. Ugh, why won't the words come out of my mouth? He looked back and forth between her and the ground a few times before finally holding her gaze. She stood there, mouth slightly open, eyebrows furrowing at the question until she shied back against the tree trunk, dropping her head so low she was practically talking into her collar. If I said yes, what would you even do about it, stupid Boruto? He sucked in a breath and looked up, taking a step towards her. I would tell you how distractingly pretty you are in that kimono, idiot Sarada. Wah! She froze. In the matter of a few seconds, his arms were wrapped around her, hugging her tightly, her own arms pinned in between his chest and hers. She wanted to push him away, but at the same time, she was extremely confused. Still trying to process the fact that he had just called her pretty. And now trying to process how fast his heart was beating. Don't cry. She blinked a few times, blush finally taking over every feature of her face. What? Don't cry, he said, again, pulling her tighter against him. You look ugly when you cry, you know. She felt like she was going to faint. The world began to seem sideways, and she was more than dizzy. Boruto, do you? Yeah, he finished before she could even talk. I didn't really understand it until a few seconds ago, but yeah. You didn't even know what I was going to ask. Her arms untucked themselves from her chest and came to rest on his back. Sarada, he said, turning his head so it rested on her shoulder. You've said it yourself. I can practically read your mind. There was no need for me to ask. I wouldn't have dragged you over here otherwise. She hated herself for hugging him back. Especially when she knew it was unfair to Sumire. But this? No other idiot would promise to protect her like it was second nature and actually follow through. No one would ever know her struggles, being the kid of a renowned hero and being forced to grow up in their shadow, having a dad that was too busy to pay her much attention, even if his was in the village. There were drawbacks to that too. No one could read her mind on missions like him. There was always a part of her that resented him, but the parts that didn't resent him understood what he was going through and wished she could help him. She looked up to his ability to make friends and admired how he could make seemingly impossible decisions within a matter of seconds. Saving Kagura even though it nearly cost him his life. Denki, Iwabe, Sumire, Metal, Mitsuki. He was like a ray of sunshine that affected everyone around him. She secretly envied his ability to gain more fighting experience than anyone in the class even if it was through pulling pranks. She thought liking him was a secret she'd take to the grave, something she denied with all of her being even though she knew it was true. She thought she couldn't associate herself with him in the academy, and even then, he still invited her to hang out with him and his friends, trying to get her to lighten up. But she thought it was just pity, concern for her like Ino sometimes showed because she was always alone. She never thought Boruto would like her back. Especially not with the way scolded him like a nagging mother all the time. Not with how much they fought. Hey, Boruto. He slowly slid his hands away from her back and looked at her. She had to look away. Why do you even like me? I thought you hated me. You always call me bossy. I always yell at you. He laughed. Why would I want to protect someone I hate? She blushed and stole a brief glance at him. Then, I don't know, I just thought. We were rivals, or something? Blinking a few times, she looked off into the darkness. Rivals. It sounded right, but at the same time, not wrong. And if they weren't rivals, then what did that make them? Teammates? Certainly not childhood friends. They both denied that on several occasions, despite there being some truth to it. Then, regular friends? They never called each other that. Frenemies? You're thinking about it, aren't you? She nodded, flushing again that he had read her mind. Your mom mentioned it to me. And I thought it sounded wrong. And then I questioned what we were, and figured out that if it wasn't any of the other things, then I must have liked you. Huh? Her embarrassment shattered. Boruto, do you even know what you're saying? By that logic, what is Cho-Cho? An acquaintance. Friend of a friend. Sumire? A friend? I think. She raised an eyebrow. You think? Well, there was all that stuff where I saved her from New, but then she disappeared and decided to follow her own path. That's pretty respectable, you know? She's a good person, but we don't talk much. Don't get me wrong. I still consider her a friend. But she's not, like you, either. Sarada sighed. How was she going to explain this idiot to Sumire? But there was still one question left that she couldn't help asking. What? What makes me different? Well, for one thing, he said with a chuckle, picking up her hand. This. He pressed her palm against his chest, but even without him holding it there, she could feel how fast his heart was beating. She blushed and pulled her hand away. Is that it? Nope, he said with a grin, taking both of her hands in his. Sarada had the feeling it was just to make her uncomfortable as she shifted backwards, the bow on her obi pressing into the tree, her cheeks red. It's been doing that all day, but I think that was because of how pretty you look. You should dress up more often, he teased. Part of her wanted to ridicule him for saying she only looked pretty in nice clothes, but he would probably retort with something along the lines of, "Do you really want your normal outfit to be appreciated the same as outfits that take you hours to put on?" She ducked her head. Can you stop saying embarrassing things so casually? But I like making your face turn red. It's fun. Boruto. He laughed again when she tried to hide her face to no avail. I'm glad that guy hypnotized you. Why? I could ask 1,000 more embarrassing questions and have all of my answers. Idiot. He caught her fist before it could connect with his arm. Please don't hurt me. Ugh. You're insufferable. I can't believe I even like you. Hey, I find it pretty hard to believe too, but it sure is nice to hear you say it, he grinned. Sarada turned away. We have to make sure to get this reversed before the mystic leaves. And there's probably a line. Let's go. Boruto pulled her back into his arms before she could escape. Boruto? Are you still gonna try and make me forget about this? Well. Sarada didn't know what to say. I don't want things to be awkward. It might get in the way of missions. And if Papa knew, he might kill you. He pulled her closer, breathing out a sigh. Sarada. What? You really overthink everything, don't you? He was right. Even during their time at the academy when he was being an annoying jerk that pretended not to know her, she tried to hide it, but it came out in her actions anyway. Wanting to try a yakisoba bun because it was his favorite. Her trembling hands as he fought Iwabe. Dragging him out of Sumair's hospital room because she was jealous. When she thought she wanted to become the Hokage, she thought she would have to give up on him. To make him into her rival. And from the semi-idiot he had turned into, she thought she was prepared. But when he told her he wanted to become like her dad and protect her, she felt everything coming back to the surface. And saw a glimmer of hope that he might like her back. If he did, what was the difference between then and now? All that was different was that they knew about it. He'd probably tease her. She'd have to deal with it. But if she was being honest. No. This was annoying. He definitely needed to forget. And there was also Sumair. She didn't know how to face Sumair. Hey, Boruto, she said, pulling back and looking up at him. When her eyes met his, it seemed like the previous Boruto-like facade he had once worn faded into embarrassment at their close proximity. Either that, or he just thought she was pretty. Either way. There's something I have to do after the hypnotist turns me back to normal. What is it? Something you can't come with me for. He furrowed his eyebrows, but she gently touched her fingers to his forehead, uncreasing the slight wrinkle that had formed there and leaving him shocked. I promise it's nothing dangerous. His face slowly turned bright red. Okay. She had to go explain herself to Sumair whether they were both going to forget or not. She owed her that much as a friend. Can we go stand in line now? Yeah. Then can you let go of me? The shock faded. If you let me hold your hand when we get back out of the tree. She sighed. Come on, let's go. Please say yes. Yes. Dang it, Boruto. He just smiled and gently released her, jumping out of the tree with his hand held out. She rolled her eyes and jumped down after him. The cold ground against her socked feet suddenly made her realize that in her attempt to get away, she had left her sandals behind. Boruto? You wouldn't happen to have my sandals? He finished for her, procuring them from his ninja bag on his waist and setting them down for her to step into. Yes. He held her hand as she balanced to slip them on, then laced his fingers into hers when they started walking forward. Be Boruto? What? You might trip. The ground is uneven. She sighed. Until we get back to where there are people. A smirk on his face, he held her hand tighter. Please hold my hand like this until we get inside the hypnotist's tent. Stop saying please. I hate that stupid word. Then is your face bright red? Shut up, she flicked the side of his head despite the small smile on her face. When they finally made it to the mystic's tent, the bald old man's eyes widened at their connected hands. Your friend came by earlier to see me. I thought you would come with him. Now I see why you didn't. They blushed and looked away, disconnecting the hands that Boruto thought were hidden by Sarada's sleeve. Can you turn her back to normal, old man? I certainly can. But before that... Boruto sighed and got out his wallet. No, that's not what I need. I need to see the future. To see if I accidentally changed it. There could be dangerous ramifications, you see. And in that case... Well, being a mystic, there are several things I could do. But it may be easier for Uchiha Sasuke to tamper with your memories. Sarada blinked back her horror. Have Papa tamper with our memories? Both of yours. And the memories of your friends, provided they saw you like that, as well. Let's see here. How old are you both now? 12, they responded, somehow at the exact same time. I see. Born a couple days apart, were you? He put his hands around the crystal ball, but this time, Boruto watched the man's eyes. They clouded over and turned a white color, reflecting the future in their lids. He saw himself with Sarada, and to his surprise, there was a child in his arms. Immediately noting that it looked like a mixture of the two of them, his face turned redder than a tomato, and he looked away. Suddenly, Sarada heaved in a sharp breath and reached for his hand. He looked back and noticed himself with a scar over his eye, Jurgen activated, tears streaming out of it. This doesn't look good. It's much worse than before. It won't hurt to tell you this now, I suppose, since I'm going to erase your memory anyway. It will make you more likely to agree with me. In the future I saw the first time, Konoha was obliterated, and a few years after that, you two got married and had a child. This time, your child is born as Konoha is being rebuilt, and, well, when a second attack is launched on the city, you're unable to protect it, and it dies. They both blinked back their horror. So you're saying... The harmless prank that I thought wouldn't result in anything changed the course of the future for the worse, so I'm putting it back. Sasuke will also need to tamper with your memoirs. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to forget about this. Now that we know, said Boruto, swallowing back a lump in his throat, couldn't we do something? I'm sorry, said the mystic, I checked it again briefly after I told you just to make sure, and it didn't change. You weren't supposed to find out that she liked you until much later. Boruto looked over at Sarada, who was starting to cry. He looked down at his own helpless self and couldn't really comprehend what he was being told. Konoha obliterated? Him and Sarada. Married? With a kid? And that kid would die? I'll give you until the fireworks go off to convince anyone that suspected you of being a couple that you aren't, or you can send them here, and I can hypnotize them into thinking they never saw anything. Either way, once I put you back to normal, it's your choice. Whichever you think is easier. But... The hypnotist was already walking towards Sarada. Wait. And sleep. This time, Boruto lost consciousness with her. When he opened his eyes, he blinked a few times. What did you just do? The old man blinked under his cleanly shaven head and face. She no longer responds to the word please. Test it for yourself. I'll test it later. And as for your memories, they'll stay intact until the fireworks show. Make sure you don't forget about your friends. If you decide to bring them in, please, don't wait in line. And don't be foolish enough to do anything in front of them in between bringing them here and the fireworks. I'm only sticking around until they start. Boruto tried to process everything he said, but Sarada was already thinking, wiping tears off of her face. He took her hand and held the flap up for her on the way out. The quickest way to convince everyone would be to bring them to the mystic's tent. I doubt I could convince Cho-Cho otherwise. Boruto nodded. Then, should we bring Inogen and Shikadai as well? Probably. Sarada glanced over her shoulder at the tent, pulling Boruto away from the crowds and around to the other side. I assume he means everyone who suspected us. And Mitsuki is already taken care of. I'll get Samaire and Cho-Cho, you look for Inogen and Shikadai. She went to let go of his hand, but he stopped her and pulled her back. Sarada, wait. What? Are you okay? She smiled. Boruto, I've liked you since I was 3. If Mr. Mystic says I'm going to remember and tell you again, then I'll remember and tell you again. He wanted to do something. But he wasn't sure what it was. He just knew he didn't want to let her go. Will you meet me back by that tree? Before the fireworks, just for a little bit? You don't even have to say please, was all she said before she pulled him into a tight hug. He held her back, relishing in the feeling of her small kimono wearing self soundly tucked into his jacket. I don't want to forget. She gently pulled away and released his hand. Save it for the tree. Boruto watched her until she disappeared, and then made his way to the food and games, looking for a spiked head of black hair and a blonde ponytail. It took some convincing, but he eventually convinced Inogen and Shikadai, who had conveniently been with Cho-Cho, to come to the tent with him. So, can you get love fortunes told at this tent? Is that why you're dating Sarada now? Cho-Cho questioned, elbowing Boruto in the side. Shikadai didn't miss the look of depression on Boruto's face. Cho-Cho. You probably shouldn't ask. Nah, it's alright. You can get your future foretold and buy stuff that cures anxiety. Maybe Metal should come by here, laughed Boruto, finally showing some of his usual self. That being said, Inogen remarked, always the one to state the bluntest of truths in the wrong circumstances, did you get rejected? You look depressed, man. Boruto thought back to what the mystic said. You will get married. And have a child. And that child will die in the second attack on Konoha. Either way, in his future, Konoha would be obliterated? He thought of the stone faces, his dad's office, his own house, Sarada's house. The academy, Kaminari Burger. Obliterated. I don't think he got rejected, sighed Shikadai when Boruto couldn't finish the sentence. Sarada was the one who confessed in the first place, wasn't she? Yeah, said Cho-Cho, chewing on some cotton candy, but knowing Sarada, she would have tried to deny it and run away. Maybe she called him some names before she ran. Boruto tucked his face into his jacket. That's not. But instead of finishing his sentence, he just shut his mouth. She must have said something pretty awful for you to get like this, said Inogen, spying the tent from across the sea of people. Ah, look. There it is. They walked the rest of the way to the tent, Inogen and Cho-Cho arguing about what might have been said to Boruto and making him feel worse as a byproduct. Once they were inside, they found Sarada with some ire, but Sarada seemed completely defeated, the corners of her eyes bright red. Boruto wanted to go up to Sarada and ask what was wrong, but he thought better of it. Save it for the tree. How much was he going to have to save for the tree? And were they even going to have time to get there? He watched as the mystic beckoned them over, Cho-Cho very willing, Inogen very suspicious. Once all of them were gathered, the mystic made sure to make eye contact with each of them, saying their names one by one. Once he had, he snapped his fingers. And sleep. All four fell over, fast asleep, Cho-Cho going so far as to snore. When I snap my fingers, you will forget any memories and associations that remain of Uzumaki Boruto and Uchiha Sarada being a couple over this past week. The mystic looked up at Boruto and Sarada, who were still in the room, quietly watching. Well, I can see the immediate future as well. Don't you have some tree you should be getting to? Sarada turned back to look at Boruto. He the few necessary steps needed to reach her and took her hand. Thanks, mister. Sorry we ended up making more work for you. Sarada's eyes widened at Boruto's apology. But he only tugged her out of the room, not wanting to be there when the four woke up. There was still an hour left until the fireworks went off. Both of them walked, hand in hand, without saying a word to each other. It was as if they were in a trance. Why had things gone and gotten so complicated? There were so many things he wanted to ask her. So many things he wanted to do. But now, he couldn't do any of them. When they reached the tree, he let go of her hand to leap onto the branch. But she went a step further and leapt up too. They both sat, not too far away, but not as close as he would have liked either. Boruto? To his surprise, Sarada reached over and put her hand on his. Maybe it wasn't surprising, considering they'd been holding hands almost all day. But this was the first time she'd done it willingly. Can I hear you say it? Just once. His face lit up. But he turned his head to the side, red dusting his cheeks, and said clearly the words she wanted to hear. I like you, Sarada. He felt the fingers on her hand gently tug at his knuckles, the rough tree bark scraping under his palm. I thought I would know what to do when I came up here with you, he started, his eyes on the masses below that swarmed in preparation for a good viewing spot to see the fireworks. But now I can't figure out what that was. I have an idea, she said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. But I'm going to save that for a little bit later. He sat, his cheek against her head, relishing in his own thoughts. There was always something more serious about their connection than the others. Something deeper. But he never really thought she'd think of him like this. Her leaning on his shoulder alone was making him dizzy enough not to be able to process thoughts in general. But then he remembered at least one of the things he wanted to ask. What? What happened with Sumire? Why did you seem so hurt when you came back with her? Sarada scooted closer and tucked herself into his side. He hesitated before gently putting his arm around her waist, forearms setting comfortably on the fabric of her obi as he secured the tree branch with his hand to make sure she didn't fall. She's asked me about you before. I think, ever since that incident with Nu, she's liked you. His cheeks tinted pink. Oh. But I didn't exactly deny liking you when she asked, I just dodged the question with a question. And when she saw us, well, she got pretty angry. And she also. When she paused and seemed like she didn't want to continue, Boruto prompted her anyway. She also? Sarada sighed. We're going to forget, so I guess I'll just tell you. She was pretty upset. And I feel terrible. But I had to tell her the truth. And she made you cry? I made myself cry. What kind of a friend does that? I wasn't supposed to say anything, I was never supposed to. Boruto's eyebrows furrowed. He knew girl relationships were a lot more complicated, but... It's not your fault, he said, putting his other arm around her. He really hated it when Sarada cried. It reminded him of all the times as a kid she'd cry seconds after he got her to come outside to play because she was scared her dad would come back and she wouldn't be there to see him. It is my fault. Cho-Cho forced you to say it. And besides, no matter how much Sumire likes me, I don't think I ever woulda liked her back, you know. Are you sure you didn't just become all moonstruck because you got confessed to by a girl? He sighed. Maybe. But it wouldn't have lasted long. I tend to take this kind of thing more seriously than you think. Boruto let go of her, turned to lean back against the tree trunk, and motioned for her to come sit. She frowned, but scooted closer. When he pulled her sideways into his chest, he picked his feet back up and crossed his ankles around her, causing her face to turn red. But she leaned against him nevertheless, her cheek coming to rest on the soft cotton of his white t-shirt, one of his knees supporting her waist, the other resting on her lap. What did she say to you? You don't want to know, she mumbled, taking off her glasses and tucking them into Boruto's jacket pocket. Those might break, you know. I have spares at home. They were uncomfortable, she said, nuzzling her cheek against his shirt. He just adjusted his arms and pulled her closer, wondering how much longer they had to stay like this. Sarada smiled and pulled her hair clip out of her hair as well, then slid it into his. Who knew, she said, her hand trailing the remainder of the way through the back of his hair and stopping to play with it. You actually look good with red flowers in your hair. When he brushed her bangs away from her glassesless face, he figured out what it was that he wanted. Why he felt like hugging her wasn't good enough. His heart slowly started to kick faster as his eyes trailed to her lips. If they were going to forget anyway. But just as he slipped his hand around behind her head, she tucked herself back into his shirt. The moon is pretty, isn't it? Leaving his hand where it was, he slowly began to run his fingers over the back of her head, letting the strands of hair fall in between his knuckles as his glassy eyes lifted towards the moon. Yeah. Despite what he had wanted, the weight of her head against his chest felt comfortable. And if she didn't want it, he would settle for this. He would settle for anything, really, as long as she stayed next to him. But how many minutes did they have left? Was it less than 10? What if it was seconds? He only continued to play with her hair, silent tears dripping over his eyes, when suddenly, she lifted her head. Mommy, said a little girl, somewhere below them, what time do the fireworks start? 5 more minutes, dear. But Boruto didn't really hear the answer because his mind was completely occupied with kissing Sarada. He had no idea what he was doing, and he didn't really feel like he needed to. He just wanted to hold her closer. She had initiated it, suddenly, just lifting her head and tilting it slightly, and the next thing he knew his eyes were closed and his thoughts were filled with nothing but her. It was over before he could even process what had happened. She gently receded back and looked at him with eyes that usually meant for an apology. But he wasn't going to let it end like that. He pulled her back, this time moving by instinct, and determined to fulfill the unsatisfied longing in his chest that she had left him with. Her gentle touch, her heartbeat, the feeling of her hand in his hair, he wanted to remember every tiny detail so that he wouldn't forget his first time kissing the girl who would end up as his wife. And maybe in the future, he wouldn't be as much of an idiot. Maybe in the future he would come to realize that she didn't hate him as much as he thought she did. When the first firework exploded in the sky, he felt something like a wave wash over him that jolted him backwards. Immediately, felt like he was forgetting something. Something extremely important. And then he looked up to see Sarada in a kimono, her palms pressing into his chest, looking at him from a few inches away. And it freaked him out. Sarada? Boruto. They were both horrified and broke apart immediately. What are you doing? I could say the same to you. A terrible blush covering both of their faces, they scooted apart. How did we get up here? I can't remember. Suddenly, a new voice joined them. Yo! They nearly fell out of the tree. Mitsuki. For some reason, they felt terribly embarrassed that he was there. And they weren't even sure why. What are you doing here? I was just watching something interesting. Aren't the fireworks nice? They looked up, previously oblivious to the fireworks exploding around them. Ah. Yeah. I guess so. Mitsuki sat down in between them, a smile on his face. He pulled the hair clip out of Boruto's hair and put it into Sarada's. He pulled Sarada's glasses out of his pocket, set them back on her face. Forgive me, Boruto. Sarada. And then he snapped his fingers. In that moment, memories flooded into Boruto and Sarada's heads. Replacement memories. Memories of going to a Wagakure and a rip-off phony mystic. Memories of coming back to find out that Naruto was putting on a surprise festival. Memories of walking around with Cho-Cho and eating takoyaki and cotton candy. Memories of asking Mitsuki to meet them at the top of this tree when he was finished with the business he needed to attend to with his parent. I'm glad we decided to meet here. This is a much better view than the top of the Hokage's faces. Oh. Yeah. You're right. Boruto's heart rate calmed down. He heaved in a deep breath and leaned back against the tree trunk, one leg lazily draped over the side while the other angled itself on top of the branch. He looked over at Sarada. And he felt his face heat up. He cursed himself for thinking that the kimono looked good on her. Meanwhile, Sarada sat, staring up at the sky. She furrowed her eyebrows at the feeling of something cold and metallic inside her kimono. And she lifted up the chain of a fire-shaped necklace. Where? Mitsuki turned, his yellow eyes gleaming. Boruto won that for you earlier, he said, staring at the silver heart as it reflected the multicolored explosions. Boruto won this for me? You don't remember, asked Mitsuki, smiling as he looked up at the fireworks. I guess you did hit your head pretty hard after that. I didn't win Sarada a necklace. Did I? Boruto squinted. He had a vague recollection of a store owner, whispering something to Sarada behind his back as he made up his mind to scoop up a goldfish. Mitsuki was there alongside him, scooping up a different goldfish and getting it first try. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get one. In the end, the storekeeper had given him the necklace as a consolation prize, and he took it. But it wouldn't do him any good to keep it so. Ah. That's right. I gave it to Sarada. But something didn't make sense. If it was a necklace, he would have given it to Himawari. Not Sarada. And why was the thought of her making him feel all warm and fuzzy inside? He looked back over at her one more time, her dark eyes staring at the necklace in her hands, and somehow felt a pang in his chest. Mitsuki did something. You ate some weird food earlier, he said, flipping backwards. Should we go home? Sarada held the heart-shaped pendant, turning it over and over again in her hand. Hey, Boruto. Why'd you give this to me instead of Himawari? Mitsuki smiled. Because he likes you. I do not. Boruto protested, but the words felt entirely wrong as they came out of his mouth. Sarada hummed and stared up at the sky. Welp. I guess we should go home. What did you eat that made you give me a gift? It must have been something pretty strong, she asked, flipping out of the tree as she laughed in Boruto's direction. His face heated up as he jumped down, feet landing on solid ground with ease. I don't know. Some takoyaki, cotton candy, a spicy chicken. But in his memory, he had eaten the spicy chicken off of a toothpick in Sarada's hand. And it made him blush. You two make a good couple after all, said Mitsuki, walking ahead of them. We do not. Boruto yelled, but Sarada seemed like she was still in a trance, her fingers resting against the pendant. It wasn't until the next day that they were made to forget everything thanks to Sasuke. But every once in a while, when Mitsuki would tease them, Boruto felt something strange. He wasn't sure what it was, but it could best be described as a massive emptiness, a longing for something he didn't know he was missing. And every time he saw a glimmer of silver tucked into the collar of Sarada's vest, he would blush, wondering why she kept something he gave her and treasured it so dearly. She herself had wondered the same thing. And the next time a festival was held and Boruto had his future checked by a traveling bald mystic man, he felt the urge to protect Sarada from him, as if he meant her some kind of harm despite it being their first time meeting. Or was he vaguely familiar? Boruto couldn't tell.
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.